You sit in that damp basement at 5 a.m., your hands trembling against a cold coffee mug while a phantom chill crawls up your spine. This heavy weight in your chest hasn't let up for months. It has been building ever since the home you built began feeling like a cage. You've tried ignoring the missing mail, forcing smiles at dinner, and double-checking locks, but the sinking feeling remains. That nagging suspicion isn't a sign of a failing mind. It's your body's final alarm warning you that your foundation is being dismantled. In the next few minutes, you'll see exactly what is happening behind your back before they erase your existence forever. My name is Arthur Silas Bennett, a 71-year-old retired structural engineer who spent 40 years ensuring the world's bridges never faltered. I applied that same precision when I built this home in 1992, knowing every nail and joist. However, no foundation could prevent the silence that moved in 2 years ago when my wife, Martha, passed away. I still catch the faint scent of lavender on her pillows and expect to hear her humming in the backyard. Sometimes I find her handwritten "I love you" notes hidden in the back of the pantry, painful reminders of a life that felt indestructible before grief turned me into a ghost haunting my own hallways. My world now revolves around my son Ethan, a 38-year-old struggling in middle management, and his wife Claire, a sharp former paralegal who calculates the value of everything she touches. I wake up at 5 a.m. for black coffee and a weekly visit to Martha's grave, trying to fulfill my duty to a family that feels increasingly distant. Before we continue this journey of betrayal and justice, I want to thank you for being here. Please comment below with the city or state you are watching from today. While this story is based on real legal cases of elder abuse, names and details have been changed for privacy, as this is a fictionalized dramatization of dad revenge. The house felt different after they moved me to the basement guest room, but it was a small porcelain music box on the hallway console that first disturbed my engineering mind. Martha had kept that box on her nightstand for 3 decades, its delicate gears playing a faint lullaby every evening before sleep. Claire told me I had asked her to move it to the donation bin because the sound agitated my nerves, a claim that felt like a phantom limb, present but impossible to touch. I stared at the dust ring on the mahogany wood where it used to sit, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to recall a conversation that never existed in my blueprints of yesterday. That evening, I found a crumpled yellow carbon copy receipt tucked behind the trash bin in the garage, dated November 14, 2025. It was a work order for a structural inspection, a task Claire insisted she had personally handled through her old legal contacts at the municipal building. The signature at the bottom was a shaky, illegible scrawl of my own name, but the ink was a specific shade of royal blue, the exact color of the fountain pen Claire kept locked in her leather desk organizer. 2 conflicting realities began to grind against each other like shifting tectonic plates, and for the first time, a cold, nameless suspicion began to take root beneath my skin. I had to be like the steel beams I used to inspect, silent, unyielding, and capable of bearing immense weight without showing a single crack. While living in that damp basement, I began keeping a meticulous log in a small leather notebook, recording every footstep that echoed above my head. I noted when Claire left for her errands at 9 a.m., and when Ethan returned, smelling of stale cigarettes and desperation, at 6:30 p.m. I was not just a grieving widower anymore. I was a structural engineer looking for the stress fractures in a fraudulent foundation. My memory was not failing, despite their constant insistences, and my mind began to sharpen with every passing hour of forced isolation. The first pattern I identified was the systematic interception of my physical correspondence by Claire every single morning without exception. At exactly 10:15 a.m., the mail carrier arrived at the gate, and before the engine of the truck even faded, Claire was at the box. I watched through the narrow basement window as she sifted through the envelopes, tucking several into her designer handbag while leaving only the junk mail for the hallway table. On January 4, 2026, I saw her pull out a thick, official-looking document from the county assessor's office. She did not even wait to get inside before she ripped it open, her face twisted in a look of predatory calculation. I waited until they left for a dinner date on Friday, January 9th, to conduct my own survey of the exterior recycling bins. Buried beneath empty wine bottles, I found the discarded envelope from the assessor's office, addressed clearly to Arthur Silas Bennett. It was a formal notice regarding a preliminary title report requested on December 28, 2025. My hands did not shake as I smoothed out the crumpled paper. Instead, a cold, familiar logic took over my senses. The document stated that a change of title was pending, yet I had never walked into a notary's office. This was not a clerical error. It was the first concrete anomaly in their carefully constructed lie. I knew I could not navigate this legal labyrinth alone, so I reached out to Sarah Jenkins, a sharp 68-year-old retired estate attorney. She had been Martha's closest confidant for 40 years and knew the history of this house as well as I did. Sarah arrived the following Tuesday at 2 p.m., carrying a large ceramic dish of lasagna as a cover for her visit. Claire watched us from the kitchen with narrowed eyes, but Sarah just smiled that disarming, grandmotherly smile that had won her dozens of cases in Superior Court. We retreated to the backyard garden, near Martha's wilting hydrangeas, where the air was cold, but our conversation was shielded from the house. I showed Sarah the crumpled notice and explained the contractor's tablet revelation, watching as her professional mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. She pulled a magnifying loupe from her purse and studied the deed of gift copy I had managed to photograph on Claire's desk. "Arthur, look at the terminal stroke on the letter R in your signature," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed anger. It was too fluid, too controlled for a man who developed a slight tremor in his right hand after the 2023 winter. Sarah confirmed the first layer of the conspiracy. The signature was a high-quality forgery, likely executed with a specialized tracing software. That night, I used my knowledge of the house's ventilation system to listen to a heated argument occurring in the master suite directly above me. I heard Ethan's voice, trembling and thin, begging Claire for another extension because a man named Vinny was losing patience with a debt. "It is $42,000, Claire, and they do not take excuses," he hissed, his words cutting through the drywall like a serrated blade. Claire's response was a chilling, low-frequency hum of manipulation as she told him to hold on for just 3 more weeks. I realized then that my own son was not just a bystander. He was a desperate accomplice selling my sanctuary to save his skin. On Wednesday morning, Sarah called me from a burner phone we had purchased at the local pharmacy to avoid any digital footprints. She had performed a preliminary search of the public records and discovered a second layer of the betrayal that made my blood run cold. There was an active application for a second mortgage in the amount of $200,000 against the property. The lender was a private equity firm known for aggressive foreclosures, and the application was dated January 2, 2026. They were not just trying to take the house, they were stripping the equity out of it, leaving me with a hollow shell and a mountain of debt. While Claire was at the gym on Thursday, I took the ultimate risk and entered her locked home office using a spare key I had hidden in 1995. Inside a charcoal gray folder labeled Phase 2, Transition. I found the most devastating evidence of their long-term plan for my disappearance. It contained brochures for a place called Sunset Pines, a state-funded nursing facility 3 counties away, with a history of neglect and a 1-star rating. There was a signed admission agreement waiting for a date, listing me as a patient with advanced cognitive decline. They did not just want my money. They wanted to erase my very existence from the world. The scale of this conspiracy was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a coordinated strike against my dignity, my finances, and my very survival. I looked at the photos of Martha they had tossed into a cardboard box and felt a tectonic shift in my soul. I was no longer a victim waiting for permission to live. I was the architect of their inevitable collapse, designing a retribution that would leave no stone unturned. Before I reveal the next phase of my investigation, I have to ask you something important. If your child betrayed you for money, would you involve the police immediately? Please type yes or no in the comments right now. The folder labeled Phase 2, Transition, wasn't just about nursing homes. It was the blueprint for my financial execution. Tucked behind the brochures for Sunset Pines was a series of photocopied life insurance documents. I recognized the letterhead of Continental Assurance, the policy Martha had meticulously maintained for 40 years to ensure I would never be a burden to our son. My breath hitched as I saw the change of beneficiary form dated October 12, 2025. The primary beneficiary had been changed from my name to Ethan and Claire's joint account. The signature at the bottom was a hauntingly perfect replica of my own, but the date was a day I was hospitalized for a mild pneumonia. Seeing that forgery was like watching a slow-motion collapse of a bridge I had spent my life building. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was my wife's final gift to me being stripped away by the woman I had welcomed into our family. Claire's history as a real estate paralegal was no longer a professional detail. It was a lethal weapon. She knew exactly how to bypass the standard verification protocols and which clerks to manipulate in the county records office. I felt a surge of adrenaline that cleared the fog of grief, replacing it with the cold, calculated precision of an engineer. Every document she touched became a piece of debris in the wreckage of her own making. I discovered the name of her primary accomplice on a series of notarized affidavits, Harold Henderson. He was a local notary who had been dismissed from a title company for fraud, yet his seal appeared on every document in Claire's folder. This wasn't a desperate family mistake. It was a coordinated criminal enterprise. Sarah confirmed that Henderson was under investigation for similar scams involving elderly residents in the northern suburbs. The realization that a professional predator was helping my daughter-in-law dismantle my life made the danger feel tangible. I wasn't just fighting a greedy relative. I was facing a seasoned criminal network that specialized in making people like me quietly disappear from their own lives. The risk escalated from financial to physical when I overheard a hushed conversation in the kitchen at 11:45 p.m. Ethan was sobbing, his voice a pathetic whimper, as he spoke to someone on the phone about a man named Vinny. "The house sale will close in 14 days, I swear," he pleaded, his hands shaking so hard I could hear the mug rattling against the counter. Vinny wasn't a bank representative. He was a debt collector for a high-stakes gambling ring Ethan had hidden for years. If the house wasn't sold and the equity drained, these men wouldn't just sue my son. They would come for whoever stood in the way of their money. My suspicion turned to pure terror when I found a stack of medical evaluations in Claire's bedside drawer, signed by a doctor I had never visited. Dr. Lawrence Miller had apparently diagnosed me with stage 3 Alzheimer's disease with aggressive tendencies. The report detailed incidents of me wandering the streets and losing the ability to recognize my own son, complete lies designed to build a legal case for my involuntary commitment. Claire was creating a paper trail that would make any testimony I gave appear as the delusions of a dying mind. She was effectively erasing my legal personhood before I could even file a police report or speak to a detective. The layers of betrayal were piling up like sediment in a clogged pipe. I found a hidden digital tablet in the laundry room, logged into a private real estate portal called Shadow Listings. My home, the one I had built with 3,500 square feet of memory and sweat, was listed for $115 million. The description was clinical. Quick closing preferred, owner relocating to assisted living. There were photos of the master bedroom, Martha's sanctuary, already stripped of her belongings and staged with generic furniture. They weren't just planning to sell it. They had already found a buyer willing to bypass the standard inspection period. The clock was ticking faster than my old grandfather clock. On January 15th, I nearly met my end when I attempted to retrieve my birth certificate from the wall safe in the study. I didn't hear Claire return early from her yoga class until the heavy mahogany door creaked open. I had to flatten myself against the bookshelves, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, as she searched for her car keys. If she had turned her head just 5 degrees to the left, she would have seen me. I knew from the look of cold iron in her eyes that she was capable of anything to protect her secret. The danger was no longer a theory. It was my shadow. I finally understood that the contractor, Marcus, was my only shield against the total erasure of my life. He had been stalling the demolition because the city inspector was also asking questions about the conflicting signatures on the permit applications. Claire was becoming erratic, her carefully polished mask beginning to crack under the pressure of the impending Vinny deadline. She started leaving my basement door locked from the outside, for my safety, cutting off my access to food and water for hours at a time. This was no longer about a house. It was about survival in a structure that was being systematically dismantled by the very people I had spent 40 years trying to protect. The final revelation came when Sarah found a transaction record I had missed in my initial search of the basement files. Claire hadn't just forged the deed and the insurance. She had taken out a high-interest private loan using my social security number as collateral. They were planning to disappear with the house money, leaving me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a 1-star nursing home bed. What I am about to tell you next is truly disturbing, and it changed the way I look at my own son forever. If you are sensitive to stories of extreme betrayal, you might want to stop watching now, because the truth I uncovered is absolutely horrifying. The confirmation of the ultimate betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. Sarah handed me the digital forensic report from Continental Assurance on January 16, 2026, at exactly 4:15 p.m. My breath hitched as I stared at the signature on the policy liquidation forms. It wasn't just a forgery, it was a betrayal of my wife's final wish to keep me safe. Claire had been systematically draining Martha's $500,000 life insurance policy for 18 months, long before she even suggested moving me to the basement. Every pension check I thought was supporting our household was actually a piece of my wife's love being stolen by a predator I called family. My vision blurred as a cold, metallic taste filled my mouth, a physiological reaction to the sudden structural collapse of my reality. I gripped the edge of the granite countertop I had installed in 1994, my knuckles turning a ghostly white against the polished stone. The room felt like it was tilting, the very foundation of my life spinning out of control, while my heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't just a confused old man anymore. I was a living witness to a slow-motion murder of my dignity and my past. The air in the kitchen felt thick and suffocating, poisoned by the presence of the woman currently laughing in the next room. Suddenly, 2 moments I had dismissed as mere senior moments surged back with terrifying clarity and a new, sinister meaning. I remembered the afternoon in July when Claire insisted I sign a health insurance update, while I was groggy from flu medication. I also recalled the way she lost my reading glasses for 3 days in October, exactly when the liquidation notices would have arrived in the mail. My love for Ethan had acted as a blindfold, preventing me from seeing the predator sharpening her claws right in front of my face. I had spent my career calculating the stress limits of steel, yet I had completely failed to measure the capacity for human evil. The mourning period of Arthur Silas Bennett ended in that very second, replaced by the cold, calculating precision of a master architect planning a controlled demolition. I reached for my phone and dialed Sarah's number, my voice steady for the first time in 2 agonizing years. "Start the legal proceedings immediately," I whispered, watching Claire through the doorway as she poured another glass of Martha's wine. The blueprint for their downfall was already finalized in my mind, and I was ready to pull the lever. "Before we reach the final confrontation, I need to know you are still with me. Are you ready to see justice served? Type 'I am here' in the comments." On January 18, 2026, at exactly 10 a.m., the structural integrity of Claire's lie finally buckled. I didn't confront them in the basement. I invited them to the kitchen for one last family meeting before the alleged move. As Claire sat at the mahogany table, already mentally spending the house sale proceeds, two uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department stepped through the front door, followed by Sarah Jenkins. Claire's face transitioned from smug condescension to a pale, waxy mask of terror in a fraction of a second. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this theater?" she hissed, her fingers clutching the table edge so hard her knuckles turned a ghostly, bloodless white against the wood. Sarah didn't waste a single breath on pleasantries, laying out the charcoal gray Phase 2 folder and the forensic signature reports directly on the granite island. "Claire Vance Bennett, we have documented 17 instances of felony forgery and the systematic embezzlement of $500,000 from Martha Bennett's life insurance policy," Sarah stated, her voice like a gavel hitting a block. The officers presented the warrant for the arrest of Harold Henderson, the corrupt notary, who had already confessed to his role in the deed fraud 3 hours earlier. I watched as Claire's eyes darted toward the exit, her predatory mind finally realizing that every exit had been reinforced with the cold, immovable steel of legal evidence. Claire attempted one final, desperate manipulation, turning toward Ethan with crocodile tears streaming down her perfectly applied foundation. "Ethan, your father is having another episode. Tell these officers he's confused. Tell them about the Alzheimer's reports I found," she shrieked, her voice cracking like a brittle timber under too much stress. She actually tried to use the fraudulent medical record she had manufactured as a shield against the truth. But Ethan remained frozen, his head buried in his hands as the weight of his cowardice finally crushed him. The room felt heavy with the scent of lavender, and the cold reality that no amount of gaslighting could repair the massive structural damage she had caused. Then came the explosion I had been waiting for, the moment the predator's mask shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "You useless, decaying old man," Claire screamed, lunging across the table until the officers restrained her in a harsh, metallic clatter of handcuffs. "You were supposed to be in that home months ago. We deserved this house. We deserved a life that wasn't dictated by your pathetic blueprints and your dead wife's ghost." Her confession poured out like toxic waste, admitting to the forged debt agreements and the secret Vinny payoff, while Ethan sobbed uncontrollably on the floor. In her venomous rage, she confirmed every single detail of the conspiracy, providing the prosecution with enough evidence to bury her forever. The lead officer, Sergeant Miller, read Claire her Miranda rights as they marched her out of the house I had built for a family that no longer existed. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching in stunned silence as the woman who had played the concerned caregiver was shoved into the back of a cruiser. Ethan was also taken into custody as a primary accomplice, his face a blurred mess of snot and regret, as he begged me for a forgiveness I could no longer find in my heart. As the sirens faded into the distance, Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder, but I just stared at the porch, watching the rain wash away her footprints. The legal fallout was absolute and devastatingly precise, leaving no room for a second chance. On March 12th, Claire was sentenced to 12 years in state prison for first-degree grand theft, elder abuse, and multiple counts of aggravated forgery. The court ordered the immediate restitution of the $500,000, plus interest, and permanently revoked her paralegal license in the state. Ethan received 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. But more importantly, he was legally barred from ever claiming a single cent of my estate or Martha's legacy. The deed to the Bennett house remains in my name, a monument to a truth that refused to be buried by greed. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights of the sheriff's cruisers faded from my driveway, and the structural integrity of my life has finally been restored. I spent the spring stripping the generic staging furniture Claire installed, replacing it with the heavy oak pieces that hold the weight of my history. Today, Martha's hydrangeas are blooming in a vibrant, defiant blue, their petals catching the morning dew just as she always loved. I found a final I love you note tucked behind the water heater during a routine inspection, a silent blessing from the past that no longer brings tears, only a steady, quiet peace. My home is no longer a crime scene. It is a sanctuary once again. I am speaking directly to you now because greed often wears the mask of concern before it strikes. Never let anyone convince you that your sunset years require you to surrender your dignity or your blueprints. Remember the commandment to honor your father, for respect is a load-bearing wall that must never be dismantled by betrayal. This is the structural integrity of the soul, standing firm when the foundation shakes. If this story of justice moved you, please comment, share, and subscribe to join our community. God bless, and always keep your deeds close. This has been a fictionalized dramatization of Dad Revenge, based on real cases of elder abuse, with names changed to protect the innocent.